I'm honored to be with you today. Excuse me, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of the many people who deal with hearing and speech disorders on a daily basis. I also want to express my deep appreciation to the Callier Center for Communication Disorders for all they do to make a positive difference in the lives of so many people. I want to start and end my conversation with what may seem like a silly thing, but I have two questions, and they're about pronunciation. In my frequent calls to set up appointments, I've heard it pronounced Callier, and I've heard it pronounced Callier. When I first started coming to the center, I wondered if it might be French and was Callier. But there's another question. Is it tinnitus or tinnitus? I grew up in Stephenville in Central Texas, and I can guarantee you I can find somebody that's going to pronounce it tinnitus. But you'll just need to ponder those questions for a few minutes. As mentioned earlier, I'm a musician. I have the greatest job in the world, and I do what I love, and I do what I feel called to do. It isn't easy for a musician to tell others that he or she has hearing disorders. In many cases, it may mean their job is at risk, and it may cast doubt about their abilities. As any musician can tell you, the inability to accurately hear pitches is disastrous. I'm so blessed to work with people who are understanding and completely supportive of my efforts through these past couple of trying years. My boss, my friend and pastor, Blair Money, the staff, and especially my associates, Annette Albrecht, Judy Melson, and Joan McFarland, they've all supported and encouraged me through some tough times. Between them and my wife, Elise, and my family, they've been anchors for me. I'm grateful that many of them are here today as well. I also want to mention that I try to keep my hearing impairments in perspective. I'm grateful that I don't have a life-threatening condition, but I do have a life-altering condition. And that's what I'm working with the past couple of years. I'm dealing with physical damage to my ears, and no one can really say what caused this. Early in my career, I had hundreds, if not thousands, of hours in recording studio work, working on jingles. And it seems that listening to those at levels that were way too loud to be safe were at least a part of the problem, if not the primary reason. And you'll notice in today's Dallas Morning News, there's an article that one of the things they talk about is how our society is so loud now, and that even going to a sporting event can cause permanent hearing damage. So take your earplugs. I have some hearing loss that so far is not profound, but I'm losing the ability to hear speech and music as well as I would like. Recent tests show my hearing range is diminishing more quickly than I would wish, but I have another major condition, and that is tinnitus. I can't say this with authority, but if mine isn't a severe case, I don't want to know what one is. Almost 10% of the population suffers from some form of tinnitus, and the odds of having tinnitus increase with age. In the video, you heard a good description of tinnitus, and there are a number of doctors here today that could give you a much better definition than I can. But my understanding, at least in some cases, is that it can be both a physical and neurological problem. Someone with tinnitus perceives sounds that are not actually present, and they're not audible to anyone else. In my case, I have damage that's caused my ears not to be able to transmit certain frequencies to the brain to be processed as sound. My brain understands that I am missing those frequencies, and so miraculously, it produces them for me every minute of the day. I don't want that kind of help, but I'm sometimes asked what tinnitus is like. We hear it described as a ringing in the ears, but at least in my case, I'm not sure that's accurate. Tinnitus can manifest itself in a number of ways. Some people experience a constant humming or buzzing. Some hear a white noise effect, like playing a radio that's not really on a station. Some hear everything as though they're in an echo chamber. Some hear a noise they describe as hearing a field full of crickets all singing at the same time. And I've actually experienced that on a few occasions. I hear high-frequency tones very similar to the ones you heard on the video, only unfortunately louder. One of my issues is that I have one pitch in my right ear and a completely different pitch in my left ear. They normally are pretty close in proximity, and for you musicians out there, they range from a minor second to a minor third. And it means I have two different pitches going every waking hour. The first thing I hear when I wake up, the last thing I hear when I go to sleep, every day. One difficulty as a musician that is I not only have to listen to those pitches, but I have to listen through them. I have to ignore these tones that scream at me every hour of the day. I may be working with music in one key while I'm listening to a constant and very loud minor chord in a completely different key. As you might imagine, this is not easy to ignore. I can tell you almost to the day when my tinnitus started. I had a 3-day recording session at the Abbey Road Studios in London, and it was a great experience. I got to conduct 80 or so members of the London Philharmonic. Then when I got back to Dallas, I had to tie singers in with those recorded orchestral tracks, and that required wearing headphones and listening at a very high volume. After the last day of the session, I walked out to my car and realized I had a funny high sound in my right ear. I also remember hoping I hadn't done permanent damage. Well, that was in June of 1983, and that sound never went away. Fortunately, it was never a bother. It was always there, but it was never too loud. I had tinnitus for over 27 years, but it was never more than just a very minor annoyance. But that changed about 3 years ago. I became aware that I was now hearing, or more properly, perceived that I was hearing another pitch in my left ear. Within 2 months, these sounds went from just annoying to terribly loud. And if that weren't enough, I developed a problem with music distorting. Higher musical sounds started to distort when I was rehearsing or simply listening to music. Any note from about an E, an octave above middle C, went from sounding like one note to becoming a cluster of screeches. Beautiful music became nightmares. I lost the love of music. I lost the love of music that I'd had my whole life. I stopped listening to music, except when I had to make music for my job. I tried to fake it, but I simply couldn't ignore the terrible sounds that dominated everything I was hearing. And here I'll just share just a little information that has applied to me at times, but it's also reflective of many other people that deal with tinnitus. I found I was exhausted. I could never relax. I was hearing these sounds every minute. And I also had to fight depression. I developed hyperacusis, which is yet another condition that creates a super sensitivity to anything remotely loud. Part of that may be because I have a fear, even though I know it's not always rational, but loud sounds, I'm afraid they'll cause worse damage and louder tinnitus. And now I have to share a secret with you. I've developed what is every performer's worst nightmare: fear of applause. For some reason, the percussive effect of clapping, not all the time, but sometimes, can be painful. However, I promise I'm not going to tell the audience that at my next concert. I was convinced I'd have to retire early, and I was afraid of never being able to enjoy music again. I never was suicidal, but I have experienced times when the tinnitus is so loud that I feel totally hopeless. I can certainly understand how many people who suffer with severe tinnitus can actually reach that level of desperation that might make suicide a consideration. Many people with tinnitus find that it deprives them of sleep, but thankfully I've only rarely had to deal with that. Many people with tinnitus also find that it makes it very difficult for them to concentrate. When it got bad, in desperation, I went to different doctors. I had MRIs and brain scans to check for all the possibilities, tried acupuncture, tried meditation. I even tried over-the-counter pharmaceutical products that were all but guaranteed to cure tinnitus. Through all these, my tinnitus just kept getting louder. After months of struggling, our music librarian at church, Joan McFarland, learned that a mutual friend of ours, Pat Mattingly, was on the board at the Callier Center. And I'm grateful that Joan and Pat are both here today. Joan told Pat what I was going through, and then I got a call from Pat that changed my life. With her help, I got into the Callier Center for the most thorough evaluation I could imagine. Dr. Kenneth Pugh helped set things up so that I got great initial care. And after several months, the Callier Center welcomed Dr. Shauna Jackson onto the staff, and Dr. Pugh wanted me to see her. From the first moment I was with Dr. Jackson, I was aware that she had already studied all my previous test results very carefully and had already started trying to work out ways to assist me. And that was all before I even met her. In my first meeting with her, she was quoting the test results back to me without referring to notes or charts, and I knew very well that she was quoting them accurately. Dr. Jackson was upfront in telling me there's no cure for tinnitus, for sure. But unlike other doctors I saw before I went to the Callier Center, she didn't tell me that there was nothing that could be done and that I would just have to learn to live with it. She did say, even though there was no cure, there were tools that might help me deal with what, at least in my opinion, seemed to be a severe and life-changing problem. It didn't happen overnight, but Dr. Jackson was determined to find something that would help. She came upon something that's counterintuitive to me, but she fitted me with hearing aids that specifically were tuned to the frequencies where I had the most damage. And these were the frequencies I could no longer hear with or without hearing aids. But somehow it had a dramatic effect on the distortion of music that was ruining my music and my career. It didn't end the distortion, but it came so much less that I could actually listen to music in spite of it. She's still working to find improvements, and she fitted me with newer technology hearing aids just a couple of weeks ago. I'm now experiencing very little distortion of music, and compared to what I've experienced over the past couple of years, this is miraculous. Yes, I still have tinnitus, and it seems to be getting worse. Yes, it drives me crazy, but my wife will tell you that's a short drive. I hate tinnitus. I hate tinnitus. I would do anything to get rid of it. Well, I wouldn't follow Vincent van Gogh and cut off my ears. But thankfully, though, the Callier Center is helping me be equipped to deal with my hearing impairments. My hearing aids contain built-in therapy programs that try to retrain my brain to ignore the fact that I'm missing certain frequencies. And there's even one program I can call up at any time that simply tries to mask the tinnitus sounds when I reach a point I just can't stand it any longer. Without the great team of people at the Callier Center and without the incredible work of Dr. Jackson, I feel certain I would not still be working in music, and I wouldn't be the same person. Sorry. I have this, I'm so emotional, I hate it. I cry at the opening of drainage ditch. It's just, every time I visit the Callier Center, I'm moved emotionally by all the other patients I see. They represent every age, from young children to older adults, and most of these patients have problems much more challenging than those I face. There are precious young children, many with cochlear implants. These patients have so many different and difficult issues with hearing and or speech, but their lives are being positively changed by Callier staff members who are not only consummate professionals, but who are caring and empathetic to the needs of the patients. In my opinion, you could go all around the world and not find better care or treatment options than those offered at the Callier Center. This finally brings me back to the questions I started with. I'm still not sure whether it's tinnitus or tinnitus. I hear doctors say both ways. And I'm still not sure if it's the Callier Center or the Callier Center because I hear it both ways when I call. But I've learned something, and it took me a while to understand how significant this was. But I've learned how to spell Callier. Callier, in all capital letters, I spell H-O-P-E.